You ever drive through Wyoming in late November? The kind of morning when the sky hangs low, heavy with clouds that don't quite know if they want to snow or rain. The Granite Ridge Mountains in the distance looked like old bones, dusted white, half hidden in fog. And the rain, it wasn't a downpour, no. It came in thin threads, steady, the kind that sneaks into your skin and stays there. The kind that makes a long-haul road feel twice as long. That morning I was behind the wheel of my old Peterbilt heading north out of Silver Creek. Name's Jack Mercer. Been a trucker most of my life. Some folks spend their years chasing company, chasing family. Me, I chased the open road mostly because it was the only thing that didn't leave. I was in my early 50s then, shoulders tired from decades of leaning into the wheel, eyes lined from squinting into too many sunrises. My hair used to be a rich chestnut, but by then it was streaked with gray, tucked under a cap that had seen better days. A Marine Corps emblem stitched on the front faded but still hanging on. That cap was just about as worn as I was. Now I didn't talk much, never saw the need. Silence, it carried weight. And truth is, I hadn't let myself get close to anything with a heartbeat since the Kansas storm 8 years back. That tornado took a good part of the town. And it took Riggs, my Shepherd Lab mix. Best damn dog I ever knew. After that, I swore no dog was climbing those walls again. My cab became my home, my thermos, my only company, my logbook, my only conversation. And then I saw her. At first I thought it was just a shadow in the rain, a trick of the fog. But no, it was real. Just past the bend on the edge of the highway sat this small golden shape, barely more than a blot of color against the gray. I eased off the gas without thinking. The headlights caught her, then a puppy soaked through, curled up tight like she was trying to disappear. On her neck hung a shred of silver ribbon, knotted and soggy, like once upon a time somebody had cared enough to tie it, but not enough to keep her. I'll tell you plain, I almost kept driving. Almost. That's what any sensible man would have done. Stray dogs on the highway aren't rare out here, and a trucker like me, well, we keep moving. That's how we survive. But I swear to you, it wasn't the storm that stopped me. It wasn't even the sight of her. It was the way she looked up at me. Quiet. Hollow-eyed. Like she'd already been left behind too many times and didn't dare to hope this time would be different. I pulled over. Gravel spit out under my tires as I brought the rig to a stop. The truck hissed as I killed the engine, leaving only the sound of rain ticking against metal. I grabbed my old flannel jacket off the seat and climbed down. The cold hit me like a slap. I bent down slow, careful not to spook her. Up close, she looked worse. Fur that should have been soft and golden was matted and streaked with mud. Burrs clung to her belly, her ears drooped flat, and one back leg trembled so bad it gave out when she tried to stand. "You gotta be kidding me," I muttered, half to her, half to the storm. She didn't bark, didn't whimper, just stared. And those eyes? Lord, I hadn't seen eyes like that in years. Wide, dark, and empty with a kind of quiet pain I recognized too well. I crouched lower, held the jacket out like an offering. "Easy now, girl," I said. My voice came out softer than I expected. "Ain't nobody here to hurt you." She blinked slow at the sound of my voice. I didn't expect an answer. Hell, I didn't even expect her to let me touch her. But she didn't flinch when I wrapped that jacket around her gentle as I could manage and lifted her into my arms. She was light, too light. Couldn't have been more than 4 months old. Her ribs pressed sharp under the wet fur. But she didn't fight. Didn't lick my face like pups usually do. She just pressed her head against my chest and closed her eyes. Back in the cab, I laid her on the passenger seat. I kept an old quilt folded there for emergencies. She curled right into it, nose tucked under her tail, shivering but quiet. I cranked the heater up and dug through the glove box for the last of a packet of peanut butter crackers. She sniffed at them first, cautious, then licked, then ate, hunger winning out over hesitation. Outside, the fog began to lift pine trees, fading in like ghosts, becoming real. I took a long pull from my thermos and watched her as the heater hummed. "Well," I said slowly, "looks like I'm not alone today, huh?" She didn't respond. Didn't need to. Her breathing slowed, settled into a rhythm. I reached for the logbook, scribbled a note about the delay in my ETA, then looked down at her again. Something came to me then out of nowhere like a leaf drifting in on the wind. "Sonny," I murmured aloud. "You look like a Sonny." Her fur, even matted and filthy, had that faint honey glow to it when the heater dried it out. And I'll be damned if she didn't stir just a little at the sound of the name. Not much. Just enough. Now listen, I never believed in signs. Still don't, truth be told. But that moment, it felt heavier than the drizzle on my windshield. Felt like a door creaking open after years of being shut tight. The road stretched on ahead of me, mist parting like a curtain. The miles were waiting. They always were. But now so was something else. By the time the sun finally broke through the haze over Silver Creek, the rain had faded to a glittering mist. My rig kept rolling northward, but I wasn't the same man I'd been an hour earlier. On the seat beside me, curled tight, slept a golden puppy named Sunny. And for the first time in a very long time, there was more than freight riding in my cab. Now let me tell you, the highway north of Silver Creek doesn't give a man much company. Mile after mile of slick blacktop, the Granite Ridge Mountains trailing in the distance, their snowy peaks poking through the fog like watchful sentries. My wipers beat steady against the drizzle, and in the cab the heater hummed a low tune. Sunny was curled up on the quilt, her tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of sleep. Every so often she'd twitch a paw, kicking like she was chasing something in a dream. I glanced over more than I care to admit just to make sure she was still breathing. Funny how fast you can start caring for something you never planned to keep. By mid-morning, my stomach was growling louder than the engine, and the fuel gauge wasn't far behind. Out here, you don't pass up the chance to fill both. So I pulled off at a little roadside diner outside a town called Ashford, the kind of place with one neon sign buzzing against the gray sky, half the letters burned out. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time I rolled into the gravel lot. The diner sat squat in square windows fogged with steam, the kind of place truckers like me had been leaning elbows on counters for generations. I cut the engine, looked over at Sunny. She blinked awake, eyes wide and solemn. "Well, kid," I said, pulling my cap lower, "guess it's time to see if you're the type who likes bacon." She didn't answer, of course. Just tilted her head like she was already weighing me in her quiet little way. Inside the diner smelled like fried eggs, burnt coffee, and 100 conversations that had soaked into the wood over the years. A bell over the door jingled as I walked in, boots tracking water onto the checkered floor. I carried Sunny in my arms, wrapped in that old flannel jacket. Behind the counter stood Clara James, tall, willowy auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes the pale green of sea glass left too long in the tide. She looked tired the way folks do when life's asked more than its fair share, but her smile was gentle all the same. "Well now," she said, setting down a coffee pot, "ain't that the prettiest thing I've seen all week?" I shifted uncomfortably, picked her up off the road outside Silver Creek, not sure what to do with her yet. Clara leaned over the counter, peering at the pup. "Lord, she's soaked through. Doesn't look like she's eaten in days. You sit yourself down. I'll bring something for both of you." I started to protest habit, I guess, but she waved me off like she'd been mothering strays her whole life. So I found a booth in the corner, slid in, and laid Sunny on the seat beside me. She curled up nose to tail, her ears flicking at the sound of dishes clattering in the kitchen. Clara came back with a mug of steaming coffee for me, a bowl of warm water, and a small plate with 2 strips of bacon she must have slipped from the griddle. She set them down, gentle as you please. "There now," she said, crouching beside the booth. "See if she'll take to this." Sunny lifted her head, sniffed the air. The smell of bacon hit her nose, and I swear I saw something stir inside her. She crept forward cautious, then took the tiniest lick. A moment later her tail twitched. "Then wouldn't you know it," she wagged. "Just once, small and slow, but clear as day." Clara's smile widened. "Well, look at that. First wag's always the sweetest." I stared, caught off guard. I hadn't seen her do that not once since I'd picked her up. Not when I wrapped her in my coat, not when I fed her crackers. But here, with the smell of bacon and the kindness of a stranger, she remembered how to hope. Clara looked up at me, eyes soft. "She yours?" I rubbed the back of my neck. "Not really. Maybe. I don't know yet." She studied me a long moment like she could read more than I was saying. Finally she nodded. "Sometimes, Jack, we don't choose. Sometimes they choose us." I froze a bit. I hadn't told her my name. Must have been stitched on the logbook I'd left half out of my jacket pocket. Still, it hit like she'd known me longer than 5 minutes. Sunny finished the bacon, lapped at the water. Then another surprise, she shuffled closer to me on the seat and pressed her head against my hip. I sat there, rough old hands resting uncertain on the table, feeling that small warmth lean into me. Clara rose, refilled my coffee without asking. "You look like a man who hasn't smiled in a while." Maybe, I admitted, staring into the steam. "Well," she said, brushing her hands on her apron, "if that little one can wag her tail again after whatever she's been through, maybe you can too." I didn't answer. Didn't need to. But inside something shifted, like a window cracking open in a house I'd shut up years ago. We stayed longer than I planned. Sunny fell asleep right there in the booth, belly finally full, paws twitching against the seat. Clara checked on us now and then, topping off my mug, never prying too hard. Just present. And sometimes that's all a man needs. When I finally rose to go, Clara leaned down, stroked Sunny's damp fur. "Take care of her, Jack. She's got more healing in her than you think." I cleared my throat, pulled my cap down low. "Thanks for the bacon." "Don't thank me," she said, eyes glinting. "Thank the good Lord for putting her in your path." Back in the cab, Sunny nestled into the quilt tail, giving one last sleepy wag before she drifted off again. I started the engine, the rumble filling the quiet. For the first time in a long time, I caught myself humming along with the radio. Low off key, but humming all the same. I shook my head, chuckling under my breath. "Your trouble, little girl," I muttered, glancing at the golden bundle beside me. "But maybe the good kind." And with that, I pulled back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead, wet and endless. But I wasn't carrying just freight anymore. The road out of Ashford stretched long and quiet, the drizzle lifting into a sky the color of old pewter. My rig hummed steady, a song I'd known most of my life, but it didn't feel quite the same anymore. Not with that golden pup curled in the seat beside me. Sunny slept most of the way, her little body twitching now and then as if chasing after something in her dreams. Every so often she'd lift her head, check if I was still there, then settle back against the quilt. And I'll tell you plain, each time she did, that something inside me ached and healed at the same time. By late afternoon, I'd decided to make a small detour. There was a place out by Rock Valley, a store run by an old friend of sorts, Frank Doyle. Retired highway patrolman, short fella, built thick around the middle with hands like bricks and a voice rough from years of yelling at drunk drivers on frozen highways. He wasn't the chatty type, but he'd always been straight with me. Years back, the two of us had hauled a family out of a snowstorm together. That kind of thing builds a bond even if you don't see each other often. The gravel lot crunched under my tires as I pulled up. The store was a squat, weathered building, half hardware shop, half general store. A red rag hung out the front door, and sure enough, there was Frank wiping his hands and squinting against the low winter sun. "Well, I'll be," he said, shading his eyes. "Mercer, that you thought you'd given up on these parts?" "Still hauling," I replied, climbing down from the cab. "Road doesn't let go easy." Frank's eyes shifted to the passenger window where Sunny's nose was pressed against the glass. He let out a low whistle. "And what's that? You smuggling cargo now? Looks like you got yourself a stowaway." I opened the door, helped Sunny down. She shook herself, sniffed the air, and then tucked herself right against my boots like she'd been doing it all her life. "Found her on the road outside Silver Creek," I said. "Looked like she wasn't going to make it if I didn't stop." Frank knelt, his knees popping as he did. His big brick-like hands reached out slow. "Looks rough, but she's got that survivor's look. Seen it plenty." Sunny sniffed his fingers, then gave one tentative lick. Frank chuckled, the sound like gravel in a coffee can. "Yup," he said. "This one's tougher than she looks." Inside, the store smelled of leather, pine cleaner, and old dust. Shelves lined with everything a trucker or farmer might need. Cans of oil, bags of feed, hunting knives, work gloves, stiff with newness. Frank disappeared behind the counter, rummaging through a box. When he came back, he held a small bag of puppy chow in one hand and in the other a red collar with a silver tag already attached. He set them both on the counter with a thump. "Take these," he said simply. "On the house." I frowned. "Frank, you don't." He cut me off with a glare that could stop traffic. "Don't argue. I don't hand out freebies often. But this one feels like she's supposed to have it." I picked up the collar, turned the tag over in my hand. One word was etched there in neat block letters. Hope. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My thumb rubbed the smooth metal while Sonny sat patiently by my feet tail giving the tiniest wag. Hope, huh? I said finally, voice low. Frank shrugged, grabbing a rag to wipe his hands again. Figure the world's short on it these days. Maybe she'll carry some for the rest of us. I crouched down, slipped the collar gently around Sonny's neck. She stayed still, looking up at me with those solemn eyes as the tag clinked softly into place. When I fastened it, she leaned forward and pressed her nose against my chin. Just like that, like she knew. Frank watched, nodding slow. Yep, that's hers now. I cleared my throat, stood up. You always this sentimental, Doyle? He snorted. Don't tell anybody. Ruin my reputation. We both laughed, short, rough, but real. Outside, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. I lifted Sonny back into the cab, the new collar catching the last light of the day. She curled up, the tag Hope clinking softly against the dashboard as if reminding me of something I hadn't wanted to remember. I lingered a moment before climbing in, eyes on the mountains in the distance. Hope, I murmured again. The word felt foreign in my mouth, but not unwelcome. Frank leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, calling out as I started the engine. Take care of her, Jack. World doesn't give us many second chances. Don't waste this one. I gave him a nod through the window, pulled out of the lot. The gravel crunched, the headlights cut through the early dusk, and the road rose up to meet us once again. In the cab, I glanced over. Sonny was awake now, her ears perked, eyes following every movement. She didn't whimper, didn't beg. She just watched me as if waiting to see what came next. And I thought to myself, maybe for the first time in years, I wasn't just hauling freight anymore. I was hauling hope. There's a stretch of highway out past Rock Valley, where the trees fall away and the world opens up wide. I'd parked there before years back just to breathe in the sight of the Granite Ridge Mountains when the sun slid behind them. That evening after leaving Frank's store, I steered the rig up there again. Maybe out of habit, maybe because I didn't want the day to end just yet. The overlook was empty. No cars, no chatter, just the low whistle of wind pushing through the pines. I eased the truck to a stop, cut the engine, and for the first time in a long while, listened. Sonny hopped down from the seat the moment I opened the cab. Her new collar clinked softly, the little tag catching what was left of the daylight. She padded to the edge of the lot, sat, and tilted her head toward the mountains like she'd lived here all her life. Not a bad view, huh, girl? I muttered, pulling my old camp stove from a side compartment. I set a dented can of beef stew on the flame, the smell of salt and meat rising into the cool air, the hiss of the burner mixed with the sigh of the wind. For once, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt settled. Sonny lay down by the open door of the rig, ears pricked at every sound. A twig snapped in the woods and she raised her head alert, then eased back down when nothing came. Watching her, I couldn't help but remember Riggs, my old shepherd lab. He used to do the same, sitting guard like the whole world was his to protect. I stirred the stew, the spoon clinking against the can. My throat tightened before I even spoke, but the words came anyway. You know, Sonny, I had a dog once. Riggs. Big fella, stubborn as a mule. Saved my hide more than I could count. That tornado. I stopped staring into the bubbling stew. The memory hit like it always did, sharp, merciless. I shook my head. Thought I'd never go through this again. Thought I'd never let another one in. Sonny rolled onto her back, then paws bent awkward and belly bared to the cold air. She looked at me upside down, tongue poking out the side of her mouth. The picture of trust, of ridiculous, unguarded joy. And I laughed. Not a dry, scoffing chuckle like I'd done to strangers over the years. Not the hollow kind you give to fill the air. No, this one came out of me like it had been waiting too long. Quiet, almost catching in my chest, but real. You little fool, I whispered, shaking my head, still smiling. You're not Riggs. But maybe you're something else I needed. She flipped back over, scrambled to her feet, and trotted over, nudging my knee with her nose. The tag on her collar tinked against the stove. All right, I said, setting a bit of stew on a piece of bread and cooling it with my breath. Here. Don't say I never fed you proper. She gobbled it down, tail wagging harder now, a little thump, thump, thump against the gravel. The rest of the meal passed quiet. I ate slow, watching the sun bleed orange into purple behind the mountains, while Sunny chased moths that fluttered too close to the light of the stove. Every so often she'd stop, look back at me, then bounce off again, ears too big for her head. When the dark settled in, I packed away the stove, climbed into the cab, and tapped the seat. She scrambled up beside me without hesitation, curled tight against the quilt, her breathing slowed steady as a drumbeat. I slipped the windows shut, the night air crisp and clean, and leaned back in the driver's seat. The little red tag glimmered faintly in the dashboard glow. Hope. And for the first time in years, I didn't dread the night. I let my eyes close, listening to the soft sigh of a puppy asleep, and I thought, maybe tomorrow didn't have to be the same as yesterday. Morning broke crisp and clear. The storm had blown itself out, leaving the air sharp enough to sting your lungs. I rolled the rig down into Pine Hill, a mining town turned half-forgotten, the kind of place held together by quilts, coffee, and the stubbornness of folks who never left. The main street was cobblestone and narrow, with a little square at its center. Wooden stalls had been set up, smoke rising from a kettle of cider. You could smell honey-baked bread, even the faint must of second-hand books stacked high on a table. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind a man the world hadn't gone all to steel and highways. Sunny trotted beside me, the tag on her collar tapping against her chest, hope glinting in the winter sun. She kept close ears up, but not fearful, just curious. As we crossed into the square, I caught the eye of a boy. Couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. Eli, someone later told me. Straw blonde hair sticking out from under a wool cap, freckles scattered like someone had flicked paint across his face. He carried his backpack half open, one strap slipping off his shoulder. His eyes lit up when he saw Sunny. "Sir," he asked, voice careful. "Is she yours?" I shifted on my boots, looked down at Sunny, who looked up at me like she was waiting for the answer too. "She found me," I said finally. "Guess that makes us even." Eli crouched, holding out his small hand. Sunny hesitated only a moment before sniffing, then sat down proper like a lady. Tail swept once across the stones. "She's real gentle," the boy whispered, as if not to scare the moment away. That's when I heard the low hum of an old gospel tune. I turned and saw her Evelyn Brooks, the town librarian. Tall, wiry frame wrapped in a knitted shawl of navy and cream silver hair twisted into a bun that didn't dare come loose. Her eyes, gray and sharp, missed very little. She stepped closer, looking from me to Sunny, then back. "That dog," she said plainly, "has healing in her. I've seen it once before. Some animals are sent." Her words landed heavier than the cold. I didn't reply. Never been one to argue with conviction that strong. Sunny pressed against my leg, and Evelyn gave a single nod like the point had been proven. She gestured toward the square. "Let the children meet her. Might be just what some of them need." Now I could have walked on, kept to myself. That was the habit. But something in her tone, gentle but certain, made me stay. We moved toward the market stalls. At first the kids came slow, cautious. But Sunny stood steady, ears flicking, tail calm. One by one, little hands reached out. She let them touch her fur, let them bury their faces in her neck. I watched as a boy with Down syndrome toddled up, arms wide. He wrapped them around her chest and simply rested there, cheek pressed to golden fur. Sunny didn't move, didn't flinch, just breathed, slow, steady, anchoring him. 5 minutes passed, maybe more, before he finally let go. That sight at near cracked something open in me. Across the square, on a bench beneath a maple tree, sat a man I recognized from Whisper's Walter Green. Thin frame swallowed by a coat too big a cap from the Korean War perched on his head. A widower, they said. Wife gone last year. Hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to anyone since. But that day Walter didn't take his eyes off Sunny. He sat there nearly half an hour silent, as if waiting for courage to return. Then, slow as winter thaw, he rose and walked over. Used to have one, he rasped, voice hoarse from disuse. Just like her. We sat on that bench together while the market buzzed around us. He talked about his wife, how they'd walk their golden retriever every morning, rain or shine. He talked about the silence of the house now, the echo of empty. His words were rough, like stone being broken open, but they came. I didn't say much. Didn't need to. Sunny lay at our feet the whole time, head resting on her paws, eyes half closed but ears turned toward every word, like she understood. Walter's hand shook when he reached down. Sonny lifted her head, pressed it into his palm, and for the first time in months, maybe longer, the old man smiled through his tears. As the sun dipped low, the market began to pack up. The children wandered off with sticky fingers and books clutched to their chests. Evelyn passed by once more, shawl pulled tighter against the chill. "She's giving more than she takes," she murmured, glancing at Sonny. "Don't ignore what that means." I looked down at the pup, her little red tag glinting against the fading light. She wasn't just recovering. She was giving recovery away, piece by piece, to anyone who needed it. And for the first time since Riggs was taken from me, I wondered if maybe I could open the door I'd shut so long ago. That night when we climbed back into the cab, both of us were bone tired. But it was the kind of tired that felt earned, the kind that lets a man sleep easy. By the time we rolled into Riverton, the weather had sharpened its teeth. The air carried that kind of cold that slides under your coat, settles in your bones. The streets were busier than Pine Hill, more cars, more noise, but the city still had a rugged small-town edge, like it hadn't yet let go of its frontier past. I'd called ahead to an old friend, Dr. Laura Mitchell. Years back when my rig jackknifed on a patch of black ice, she was the medic who patched me up, quick hands and no-nonsense voice. Since leaving the service, she'd opened a small wellness center for animals on the edge of town. We hadn't talked much in the years between, but when I told her about Sonny, she just said, "Bring her in." The building sat low, tucked behind a row of pines, warm light spilling from its windows. Inside smelled of chamomile and clean linen, not the sharp sting of antiseptic. Cats dozed in window boxes, a bandaged retriever hobbled slowly across the tile. The sound of soft piano music drifted from a radio somewhere in the back. Laura stepped out from an exam room, hair cut short, eyes the steel gray of someone who's seen too much but refuses to break. She walked with a slight limp, a reminder of shrapnel that never quite healed. "Well, Jack Mercer," she said, hands on her hips. "Thought I'd seen the last of you." "Still breathing," I said, shifting my cap. "Figured that counts for something." Her gaze dropped to Sonny, who peeked out from behind my leg. "This the one?" I nodded. Laura crouched, her hands gentle but practiced as they moved along Sonny's sides, pressing, checking ribs and legs. Sonny stayed still, only her eyes moving, watching. "She's been through a storm," Laura murmured, "but she's mending. Nerves are still raw, though. Keep doing what you're doing, Jack, and she might just turn into something special." I didn't answer. Couldn't really. The idea of special felt like more than I was ready to take on. A man approached then, Aaron Lopez, Laura's assistant. Young, quiet, with dark curls and an easy warmth that settled the room just by walking in. He whistled low, crouched to Sonny's level, and offered his hand. "She's got good bones," he said softly. "And a good heart, too. You can see it in her eyes." Sonny surprised me by wagging small shy, but there it was. Aaron smiled. "Told you." While Laura ran a few tests in the back, I sat in the waiting room. The chairs were worn but comfortable, the kind of furniture chosen by someone who wanted people to stay a while. That's when I noticed her. A little girl sitting cross-legged on the floor with a coloring book spread across her lap. Must have been 6 or 7. Tight brown curls framed her face and oversized glasses kept sliding down her nose. Markers lay scattered around her like flower petals. Her name, I overheard, was Emily Carter. She hadn't spoken in nearly 2 months, ever since the car crash. Trauma, Laura explained later. Her mother brought her here for animal therapy, hoping to spark something words couldn't reach. I watched as one of the staff gently guided Sonny toward her. My throat tightened. Emily looked up, cautious but not afraid. Her little hands were smudged with red and blue ink. She held them out slowly, palm open. Sonny sniffed, hesitated just a heartbeat, then lowered her head into the girl's lap. The tag on her collar tinked against the plastic markers. The waiting room seemed to hold its breath. Emily's fingers, stained with color, smoothed down Sonny's damp fur. Then, without warning, she began to hum. A tune, soft, broken, like a bird testing its wings. But it was sound. Her first in weeks. I gripped the arms of my chair, the air thick in my chest. Laura, coming down the hall with a clipboard, stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes softened, mouth parting just enough to whisper, "Would you look at that?" Aaron glanced at me, grinning faintly. "Told you she's got a good heart." Sunny didn't move, didn't flinch, just pressed herself deeper into that little girl's lap, breathing steady, letting the hum rise and fall against her ears. Emily's shoulders relaxed, and for the first time a spark of joy flickered in her wide, cautious eyes. Laura crossed over, laid a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm grounding. "Storms bring out something fierce in the quiet ones," she murmured. I couldn't speak. Could only nod, watching as my stray pup did what I hadn't dared believe possible. She'd pulled a child back into the world with nothing more than her presence. Later, when the tests were finished and the paperwork done, Laura handed me a manila envelope. Inside were certification forms, therapy, dog paperwork already half filled and fast-tracked. "I know someone in Helena who can push these through," she said. "Old friend owes me a favor." I stared down at the forms, the letters swimming under my tired eyes. My hands felt clumsy, holding them like they belonged to someone else. "I didn't plan for this," I muttered. Laura gave a half smile. "The good things. You never do." Outside, the morning was brittle and bright, the cold biting deeper than before. I opened the cab door and Sunny leapt up before I could even pat the step. She circled once on the quilt, then flopped down, the red tag clinking against the dashboard. Through the side mirror, I saw Emily still standing in the doorway of the clinic. She lifted one mittened hand, small and slow waving. I raised mine in return. That's when Sunny barked. Just once. Clear, sharp, cutting the cold air like a line drawn across the past. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was certainty. It was hello. And maybe, just maybe, it was forward. Snow had started to creep into the corners of Wyoming by the time I drove into Fairfield. The sky had that pale, brittle look it gets right before winter clamps down for good. The streets were dusted, white breath hung in the air like smoke, and even through my heavy coat the cold cut sharp. Beside me, Sunny had grown stronger in just a week. Her ribs no longer showed like they did that first night. Her eyes held more light. She sat upright in the passenger seat now, a knitted scarf wrapped clumsy around her neck, something Dr. Laura had slipped me before we left Riverton. The tag on her collar tapped steady against the dash with every bump in the road. Hope. I'd arranged to meet Sarah Nolan here, a social worker who ran therapy visits with dogs at recovery homes and shelters. She was mid-30s, quick wit in her eyes, but her face carried the worn beauty of someone who had given more than she ever saved for herself. Her hair was always tied back in a bun. She never seemed to fix glasses perched on her head but never used. The shelter was tucked behind an old Lutheran church, its windows glowing yellow against the frost. Inside, the air smelled of strong coffee and something warmer, hope maybe, though I wouldn't have admitted that back then. Men and women sat in circles, talking low, some not talking at all. These were people clawing their way back from the edges, drugs, drink, the kind of battles most folks pretend not to see. Sarah greeted me at the door, pulling her scarf tight. "Jack Mercer," she said with a half smile. "Heard a lot about you." "More about her." She nodded at Sunny. "Don't believe everything I muttered, but there wasn't much bite in it." Sunny followed close as we moved through the hall. Her steps were careful but sure, ears flicking at the hum of conversation. And then she stopped. A man sat apart from the others, shoulders hunched, hands shaking in his lap. He was maybe in his 60s, face pale, eyes sunk deep from withdrawal. But his voice still carried a faint music when he whispered, hoarse and broken, golden, like the one I had as a boy. That was Henry Walsh. Years of addiction had taken most things from him, but not the memory of the dog that once slept by his bed. Sunny stepped forward, nose down, tail low but wagging. She pressed her head gently against his knee. Henry froze, staring down as if he'd forgotten how to be touched. His lips trembled, and then the tears came, silent at first, then shaking raw. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders hunched, and for a moment the whole room fell quiet. Sarah's eyes shone as she looked at me. "It's like she knows where to go," she whispered. I didn't answer. My throat was too tight. The rest of the day, Sunny moved from circle to circle. Sometimes she lay at someone's feet. Sometimes she nudged a hand until fingers found the strength to scratch behind her ears. She didn't fix anyone, but she softened something. And in places like that, soft is a miracle. By evening I was bone tired, but Sarah wouldn't let me leave without joining a volunteer gathering upstairs. Her apartment sat above a bakery, the smell of cinnamon and old paper filling the space. The living room was cluttered with books, mismatched mugs, and photos of faraway places tacked to the walls. There among the small crowd was Martha Hill, a retired schoolteacher with snow-white curls and a spark in her eye that could have lit a barn. She carried a tin of homemade muffins and spoke in little rhymes without meaning to. The moment she saw Sonny, she knelt right down, laughing. "This pup's got soul," she declared, scratching behind Sonny's ears. "Probably taught angels how to bark." The room chuckled, but there was something true in her words. Sonny leaned into her touch-tail, wagging slow and steady. We sat together sipping coffee from chipped mugs, sharing stories of grace, small victories, tiny mercies. A young man talked about writing a letter to his estranged father. A woman said a student she thought had forgotten her sent a note that saved her week. When it came to me, I didn't know what to say. I cleared my throat, stared into my cup, then finally spoke. "I thought I picked her up off the road," I said. "But now I'm starting to think she picked me." The room went quiet, not with discomfort, with recognition. Heads nodded, eyes softened. Sarah lifted her mug. "To second chances," she said. "We all raised ours." Later that night, when Sonny and I returned to the rig, the streets of Fairfield were quiet, the snow glowing faint under the street lamps. She hopped into the cab, circled once, and curled tight. The little red tag tapped against the dashboard, a steady reminder. I leaned back in the driver's seat, hand resting on the wheel. For years, all I'd carried were freight and regrets. But with her there breathing slow beside me, I felt something different, something alive. Sometimes God doesn't shout his miracles. Sometimes he whispers them into the world through a muddy pup on the side of a frozen road. And I, old road-worn Jack Mercer, had finally learned to listen. Morning in Fairfield came brittle and pale. The storm had passed, leaving snow piled along the sidewalks, the world washed clean and sharp. The bakery downstairs had already lit its ovens. The air outside carried the smell of bread and cinnamon. Folks moved slower in that kind of cold shoulders, hunched breath puffing like little chimneys. I'd planned to leave early, beat the weather, keep the miles rolling. That was my way. Keep moving, don't linger. But Sarah Nolan caught me as I climbed down from the rig, scarf wrapped tight against her chin. "Jack," she called, hurrying across the lot, her boots crunching through ice. In her hand she held an envelope. "Before you go, Henry asked me to give you this." I frowned. "Henry Walsh." She nodded. "Said thank you wasn't enough." I opened the envelope right there, my breath fogging the paper. Inside was a folded sheet, edges crinkled like it had been held too long in shaky hands. On the front, a drawing, childlike but clear. A man, tall and square, standing beside a golden dog under a bright blue sky, the sun drawn big in the corner, smiling down. On the back, scrawled in uneven letters, "You gave me something to hold on to again." I stood there a long moment, the street noise fading until it was just me, the paper, and the weight of words I hadn't expected. My throat tightened, but I managed to nod, tucking it carefully into my logbook. It found its place among shipping receipts, fuel slips, and years of clutter, but it carried more weight than all of them combined. Sarah laid a hand on my arm. "She's doing more than you know, Jack. Don't turn away from it." I cleared my throat, adjusting my cap. "Not sure I ever asked for it." She smiled faintly. "The best gifts? You don't." Back in the cab, Sonny was already perched on the passenger seat, tail sweeping against the quilt. She barked once, sharp, certain, like she'd been waiting for me to get on with it. All right, I muttered, climbing behind the wheel. Impatient little thing. She hopped onto my lap just long enough to press her nose against my chin, then dropped back to her spot, curling up tight. The red tag on her collar. Hope tinked gently against the dashboard as I started the engine. The rig rumbled to life, shaking frost from the mirrors. Through the glass I saw Emily Carter, little girl from Riverton, standing in memory in my mind's eye, humming her tune. I saw Henry Walsh, tears breaking loose as Sonny pressed her head to his knee. I saw old Walter Green in Pine Hill smiling for the first time since his wife passed. One by one the faces lined up in my mind like mile markers on a road I hadn't realized I was driving. I gripped the wheel steady, and for the first time in years, I felt more than a man hauling freight. I felt like a man carrying something that mattered. The miles stretched out before us, the highway glistening in the morning sun. The snow shimmered the Granite Ridge Mountains, standing tall in the distance, their peaks sharp against the sky. I glanced at Sunny. She stirred in her sleep tail, giving the faintest twitch, and I thought plain as day. She didn't need me to save her. She saved me. And maybe she's here to save a few others too. You see, folks always expect miracles to come loud with thunder, lightning, or trumpets in the sky. But I've learned different. Sometimes God works quiet. Sometimes His angels don't wear wings. Sometimes they come with muddy fur, a torn ribbon, and eyes too wise for their age. That morning, as Fairfield shrank in my mirrors, I whispered to the empty cab, "Thank you for second chances." Sunny shifted, sighing deep as if she'd heard. The road opened wide before us, endless as it had always been. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of where it led. Because this time, I wasn't riding alone. Sometimes we rush past what God puts right in front of us, too busy, too hardened, too blind. But if we slow down, if we dare to stop the truck, open the door, and let hope climb in, we just might discover that miracles have been waiting beside us all along. Jack Mercer didn't plan on saving a golden pup that day on the highway outside Silver Creek. But by saying yes to one small life in need, he found himself carrying more than freight. He carried healing. He carried second chances. He carried hope. And her name was Sunny.